This is my second attempt at a story. I feel like I did a good job on the writing here. I hope you guys enjoy it. The fabled Richardson Ranch. This was my childhood here. It has been many years since I was here. With all these years, it still looks like home. I am 84 now. The memories are faded away, but there's still enough to have kept me up at night all of these years. I remember the fields of corn that used to be planted, harvested, and burned yearly. Might explain why I grew up to be such a pyromaniac. The barn was behind the house, about 50 feet diagonally to the right, if you were looking from the street. To the left was the forest I always played in until I was a teenager. After that, I was more focused on hiding in the woods, not that my dad even paid much attention. When I was 10 years old, me and my father's lives changed forever. Dad was watching TV after a long day of maintaining the fields. I don't know why he still even took care of the farm anymore. We had been well off on money since I could remember. He always said that the legacy wouldn't die with me or him. The money wasn't why he farmed. It was his way of life, and his father's 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 way of life. It's what we did. As my father and me were in the living room lounging, my mother was doing her part to keep the farm going. After a long day of leveling the fields, she told my father to sit back and relax while she checked on the tractor. She had been mechanically inclined since she was very young. She too was born into a farming family. She had saw that the tractor had some loose cords hanging down under the engine. The engine was near the front, boxy and big. She got underneath to zip tie them together and get them away from being possibly pulled or crushed down in the future. As she did this, the unthinkable happened. The tractor kicked to life. The police later said it seemed like the wiring was exposed and she had engaged the starter. The attachment for cutting down the crops was still attached to the front. It looked like those old push mowers, spiraling massive razor-sharp blades. Her leg had gotten caught under, and it was peeling back layers. My mother howled. That was a sound that never left my mind. Me and my father rushed out the sliding glass door in the back of the house and ran to the barn. There we were struck with a horrific sight. She was holding onto the engine grill for dear life. Now one leg was absolutely demolished. But these blades were not only made to cut, but also pull. She was being pulled in. The blades were nearing her pelvis, her left leg nearly gone, and still pinned to the ground. Her right leg pushing against a wheel to try and fight the pull of this massive machine. My father ran over to her to try and stop the tractor. The tractor started without the key. This was an older model that had had repairs in various ways, so it wasn't supposed to be started the way it was. It had no way to shut off without putting the key back in, taking it out again. My father yelled for me to go get the key from the house. I was still at the barn door, just stunned. I bolted to the house and grabbed the key from the key rack in the front foyer. When I got back to the sliding glass doors, I heard the second scream I would never forget. This time it was my father. My dad later explained, when I was about 14, what happened. My mother was still stuck while my dad tried to comfort her. He told her, "Marcia, we will get you out of this. You will be just fine. We will all be fine." She looked up at him. Her eyes were bloodshot red and she was shaking. Between fighting for her life and the blood loss, she was using the last bit of energy she had. She still pushed to say, "I love you, Frank." My father grabbed her arm and tried to help pull her out, but when he did, she attempted to let go of the grill with her other arm and grab onto my father's hand to get out of there. The second she let go, the battle she was fighting ended. The blade sucked her in and decimated her. The scream my dad let out was so loud and otherworldly that if I didn't know it was him, I would have thought it was an animal. I wish this was the last traumatizing thing that would happen from my childhood at this farm. I wish. When I was 16, we still lived at the farm. My father was a shell of a man. He lay on the couch lifeless. His hair, what was left of it, was gray, and over time he had become obese. We had the money to survive, so the cornfields and the majority of the farmland at this point was overgrown and in disarray. The tractor was still sitting in the shed, minus the cleaning service that had come up to clean the mess that fateful day. No one had been in there. We sat there most days, after I would get home from school, barely talking and watching TV. I felt bad for my father. His life effectively ended the day my mother passed. We were sitting in the living room when we heard a loud noise, almost like machinery that wasn't maintained. Loud clunks and screeching noises. It was coming from the barn. We both went out to the deck, and we were both frightened and confused. It was clearly the sound of the tractor. We both wondered how it could even be running after all these years, but more importantly, who did this? My father grabbed his rifle that sat above the fireplace, told me to stay on the deck, ready to call 911 if need be. He rushed over to the barn, opened the door, and just stood there for a good 30 seconds, speechless. I watched his body language. It was as if he was in awe of what he was seeing. Then he let out a sentence that was the centerpiece of the nightmares I would have into my 30s. "I'm coming, Marcia!" At that, he ran into the barn, and all I could hear was a loud whirring of blades and a sloshing noise. The tractor then stopped. I stood there for 30 more seconds waiting for something, anything to happen. Nothing did, so I walked towards the barn, shovel in hand, heart beating faster than the thoughts racing in my head. When I got to the barn door, I peered inside. What I saw shook me to my core. My father's body was splattered across the room, his torso still stuck in the rusty old blades. The majority of his body either severed or hanging on by threads. But what got me the most? My father's face. He was smiling. For the first time in 6 years. I immediately threw up and lost my footing. I called the police and didn't move. I couldn't move. When they arrived, nobody was in or has been in the barn for many years except my father. They concluded that it was clear from the footsteps and the dust in and around the barn. Either no one or my father started that tractor. They ruled it a suicide. I had been put up for adoption. I was lucky and did find a loving home, and I received my inheritance at the age of 18. At this, I started backpacking, trying to escape my past. It was because of backpacking that I met Mary. She was a beautiful woman, smart and proper. We had a good life together. We never had kids. She was barren. At that, we decided not to adopt. We enjoyed each other's company enough to be happy. We traveled for a good portion of our 20s and 30s, and we lived off the fortune that I had been left, exploring the wonders of the world. Eventually settled down less than 100 miles from the Richardson Ranch. I had inherited the property but never got the gut to sell it or go there. In my late 30s, however, I decided it was time to see my old home, reminisce about my childhood, and see how it looks after all this time. I went alone. I felt that I had to. To truly feel what I wanted to on this trip, I didn't want anyone else there to influence my thoughts or feelings. When I arrived at the house, the barn was still standing, and it looked well. I had paid over the years to have companies check up and maintain the property. I eventually hired a bank to take care of these affairs for me. I, later in life, had put away more than enough in that account for the land to be maintained indefinitely. I walked up to the house and saw my old room. Nothing was changed in the house. There wasn't dust on anything due to the cleaning service, but I made sure they were informed to not move or take anything ever. After looking through the house, as it was left all those years ago, I felt the feeling of when I was 10 again. The love in this house, the warmth that used to be in this family. When I got to those sliding doors, it all came flooding back. I began to sob as I opened them, walking into the backyard, which I hadn't done since my father passed. I sat there for a few minutes collecting myself when I saw a man go into the barn. He was fit, with jet black hair. I yelled, "Hey!" I assumed this was a worker, maybe sent by the bank, but there was no response. So I started walking towards the barn when out of nowhere, I could hear that old tractor start up. I assumed they maintained it, since it was just another thing they could bill the account for. So this didn't surprise me. But when I got to the barn door, my heart sank. Standing there was my mother. She looked just like she did before the accident. And my father, who wasn't the obese, falling apart man anymore, but the dad I remembered from when I was real young. I thought I was losing it. They both called out to me. My mother pleaded with me to come inside so we could be together. My father apologizing and admiring the man I had become. "The legacy is back," he said. I didn't know what to do. My mother just kept saying, "Come be with us," and gesturing towards the tractor. I screamed. I was filled with so many emotions and couldn't fathom what to do, so I just ran. I heard both of those yells I had heard all those years ago. My mother's howl, but this time I could tell it was as if she was losing her son instead of her life, and my father sounded similar. This was then matched by silence and the tractor engine halting. I kept running till I got to my car, sped off, and didn't tell a soul about this. I was 81 when my wife passed. She lived a great life and went peacefully in her sleep. I was glad to have the many years I had with her. At the age of 83, a few weeks before my birthday, I was diagnosed with stage 3 cancer in my rib cage. generally something that is fatal. By the time I was 84, I was rounding stage 4, and I knew it was my time. That's when I decided I would come back here to my childhood home. The barn and house looked just as good as I remembered. I gave the rest of my inheritance to the bank to continue to maintain this land for as long as it can. I write this note to let you know that I lived a great life and regret nothing. Please bury me with my mother and father by the cornfields. Whoever reads this, I hope it finds you well. You will find me in the barn. Please make sure they keep my home safe. Signed, Mark Richardson. The housekeeper would find this note. She checked the barn, and to her horror, there was Mark's body, similar to his father, in pieces, but still some in the blades of that old tractor. But then she saw his severed head on the barn floor. There was a grin on Mark's old worn-out face. The other officers said they saw a young child, most likely preteens, running through the woods, but there was a search of the area. They found nothing. Driving away from the scene, I never shook the feeling of what went down on that farm. I hope you enjoyed this story. I had a fun time writing it. My loved ones actually gave me some input on this one, and I feel like they may have helped me create what I think is a pretty great story. I appreciate your time, and I hope that you have a great day. If you would, please like and subscribe. Planning on doing these at least a few a week. I really enjoy making them, and I hope you enjoy them as well. Have a nice day.